Everyone dreams of having control of their own time right until they have it, and then they realize it's lonely at the top.
When you were in Amazon, what was your idea of success?
Building products people love, grow my team and grow my level so I could do more of it.
What is your idea of success now?
And so I now define my mission.
Today's guest is someone who helped shape the digital world as we know it. Ethan Evans spent over 15 years at Amazon, where he led global teams and invented some of the company's most iconic products. We are talking Prime Video, Amazon App Store, and Prime Gaming, to name a few. He has an amazing leadership track record, and his influence has touched the careers of countless leaders, including engineers who have gone on to become VPs and C-suite execs. Ethan retired from Amazon as a vice president in 2020, and since then he is focused on giving back, helping others to succeed and thrive, just as he did. We're going to talk about his journey from leading teams at Amazon to becoming a coach. We will discuss corporate challenges, imposter syndrome, career transitions, and the principles behind success. So what was it working for Amazon?
That's of course a big question.
How people grow in such a culture, get promoted, what's the process?
Amazon is very hard driving. The fundamental way to get promoted was...
So you were in such a giant as Amazon, and then you decided to leave. When was this moment?
I think there were a couple moments that led to it. The first moment was...
Ethan, I'm so happy to have you on my podcast.
Annie, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Great. So why don't we start with you giving a little bit of a backstory and put everything in perspective for our listeners and those who are watching the episode.
Okay. Well, I think my backstory is I grew up when computers were just coming into the home. I got a home computer right as I went into high school and taught myself to program. And then I actually wrote Apple Computer a letter and said, I want to work for you after I graduate. Where do I go to school and what do I study? And I got a handwritten letter back, told me where to go. I went to one of those schools, Carnegie Mellon. I got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and then I went to a series of startups. Ironically, never to Apple. And then in 2005, after 12 years in startups, Amazon called me, and I went and had a 15-year executive career at Amazon. I was the first engineering leader to work on Prime Video, which most people have probably used. I then built the Amazon App Store. I worked at Twitch, which is a company Amazon acquired in video games, and was part of the executive team there. At the end, though, I found that having managed teams of 800, needing to develop my leaders, that I was spending more and more time coaching, and I liked doing that. And so I left Amazon to coach and teach full-time, which is what I do today.
Wow, that's amazing. So what was it working for Amazon?
That's, of course, a big question. I had the good fortune to work at Amazon during incredibly high growth times. My team there, I started with a team of 6 people, and 9 years later, I had 800. So my team grew 130 times. During my whole run at Amazon, I did the math once for fun. The stock went up 9,082%.
Wow.
The company grew from about 14,000 to about 1.4 million, so 100 times total employee base. But what it was like to work there was then this endless sense of an open future, that you could start new programs, you could create new things, you could build teams, and it really came down to the quality of your ideas and could you turn them into real businesses. And so my journey at Amazon was going from seeing myself as an engineering manager, my job is to build what I'm told, to a business leader, my job is to create value at a very large scale for the company. And then, of course, I can talk, and maybe you'll be interested later. I know some of obviously, I worked with Jeff Bezos. I know some of the Amazon leadership figures, and I was there for some of the big decisions made in the market.
Great. So it's interesting. What was the culture like to drive people to think for the future and be bold?
Yeah. So Amazon has a set of leadership principles, which are core to the fabric of the culture. Those leadership principles are posted on their website and were written by the management team. But the key is they're not just things that are on the wall, like a poster in an office. They use the leadership principles for how to select people. So when we interview people, every interviewer is assigned 2 leadership principles to evaluate the candidate. So we're looking for people who are cultural fits. Then the same principles are used to evaluate you at your review, and if you're being considered for a new role or a promotion, to evaluate you for your readiness. The result is the principles really are part of the fabric. So Amazon culture is indistinguishable from those principles. That said, the principles require very hard work. And it was a culture that in some ways was a sweatshop. It also is a culture that doesn't bother very much with praise. In other words, if you do really good work, there might be a one line like, oh yeah, that was good, nicely done. But then the next day, it's right on to what are you doing next? And so it was one of the principles says leaders have a high bar, which they're always raising and which many people consider to be unreasonable. And so they, as a culture, it was considered appropriate that as soon as you accomplish something to say, okay, that's nice, now here, now here, now here. And there was a joke that said Amazon is where high performers go to feel bad about themselves. And so the culture had benefits and drawbacks, but I will say you had a lot of extremely motivated, talented people working almost obsessively hard. And that did produce just tons of results because given that Amazon had a successful platform, if you have a lot of high performers that are driven to do something new and they have that big asset to work with, it can be very successful. So just making everything I'm saying specific as an example, Amazon already had the Prime program. And when I built the video service and we decided to include it in Prime, that suddenly put it in front of millions of people and made it free for them to use, given that they were already paying for Prime. And so, of course, lots of people used it. And this is a snowball effect because then lots of people are using it, which means people in Hollywood or elsewhere are very interested in being a part of it. And at one point, all the big TV manufacturers came to our group and said, oh, we'd like to put your service on our TV in the menu so that people have something to watch. And so the power of the platform meant that if you had a good idea and were able to make it work, it would be adopted by a lot of people.
It's amazing. I just can't imagine what it is to know that your product is seen by millions and millions of people all around the world. How people grow in such a culture, get promoted, what's the process? Any takeaways for the listeners?
Sure. So Amazon is very hard driving, and the fundamental way to get promoted was to create a business impact. What does that mean? To be able to generate new revenue or growth. It is and certainly was a very growth and profit oriented company. And so to be promoted, you had to stand out as someone who could invent something new, or someone who could optimize an existing product to get a lot more users, or who could optimize cost. In a technology basis, you had to be able to create a new system that could scale to these millions of users. And that's the story of AWS. And then the other part of promotion is always relationships and interpersonal skill. You can't promote someone that drives away their team members or who works their team members to where they quit. In Amazon, that was often described with the phrase leaving bodies in the wake, which meant the ship was moving.
Yeah.
You were throwing dead people overboard as you worked them
Yeah.
to death. And that was not, that would eventually catch up to you. So to get promoted, though, I teach a lot about this. Promotion is really showing that you're capable at the next level and building the relationships to where the leaders above you trust you to take on the next challenge. Because if I don't trust you, then I can't have you in that role, because then I have to watch you all the time and be careful that you won't make a mistake or you won't make a decision I disagree with. So that's the trust piece.
So you worked in such a giant as Amazon, and then you decided to leave.
Yes.
When was this moment? What happened? Why did you decide it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there were a couple moments that led to it. The first moment was I was promoted to vice president. I had this large team of 800 people. I'd been working very hard. I'd been at Amazon 8 years. And I asked myself, okay, what's next? And Amazon at that time had about 12 what they called senior vice presidents. And I was newly promoted as one of about 300 vice presidents because, as we just discussed, the company was so enormous. So I asked myself a couple of things. First, I looked at my 300 peers, many of whom I knew, and I asked myself honestly, how good am I relative to these people? And there were some people I could point to and say, I'm more skilled than she is. I'm harder working than he is. But there were also some people I could look up to and say, that person's really good and I'm not as technical or I'm not as inventive. At that time, there tended to be one new senior vice president maybe every other year. And so I asked myself, if there's one seat every other year and I'm somewhere in the middle of the 300, how does this work out? And so I realized I probably was either not going to ever achieve the senior vice president level or not for many, many years. And I asked myself, is that what I want? Do I want 10 more years of chasing a promotion? And I didn't. So that was point one. Point two is very pragmatic. I was making good money, and probably all of us have a notion of how much, money we'd like to have to feel secure in retirement. And so I drew a graph and did all the, the plotting and spreadsheet. And so that gave me sort of an amount of time.
Yeah.
And then I, though, had to ask, what else would I want to do? And I mentioned earlier that as my team grew, I found myself doing more and more coaching and teaching, and I loved that. And so I wanted to stick to it. I wanted to keep coaching and keep teaching. So the third piece was once I had the money, I had decided I would go out on my own and start teaching others. And that's what I did.
And in the process, so you said that you were 8 years in Amazon and then you decided. And you stayed another almost
7 years.
7 years. That's a good preparation period. Were you afraid to do the step, or when was the moment when you say, okay, now I'm leaving now, because it's like 7 years?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. The first year or so, it took me a year or so to realize that I didn't want to pursue the current career path. And then when I looked at how much money I'd need, it looked like maybe 4 more years, something like that. And then, and I'm watching one of my friends go through this right now, there's a tendency to do what's called moving the goalpost, which is you get to the amount of money and then you're like, well, okay, but a little bit more would sure make me feel safer. And so then you do that. And then you're like, well, a little bit more. So I did a little bit of that. And then the pandemic came. Right as I was getting ready, I had set my date. I had talked to my manager about, on this day, I'm going to leave. And then about 3 months before that, the pandemic started. And no one knew what was going to happen. No one knew what was going to happen to, say, the stock market, which affects your money, but also to the world. And so I pushed back my departure date a little bit to get a sense of what the new world would be like. And then finally, about 6 months into the pandemic, I had my team running well. I talked to my manager who I'd been very open with about my plans, and I left. And that's what, so your specific question was I afraid? Sure. I was, because you're very good at something and you're being paid a lot to do it. It's hard to stop, and people like your work. And so it's hard to give all those things up.
So what was the next day after you left? What was the next day? Did you wake up and say, what did I do?
No, I definitely woke up ready to be, because I had spent so long getting ready for it, I was very happy. And I actually spent the first 7 or 8 months doing very little in terms of starting a new business or actually following my goals of teaching. I just took what amounted to a very long vacation. I dabbled in some lightweight teaching and whatever, but I didn't really get serious about what I do today for maybe 9 months.
That's exactly what I did too. I took a year.
Right?
Because when I was leaving, I took 2 years, not 5 like you.
Yeah.
One of my mentors, he told me that when you're in the corporate life, you think in a different way. You see the things around you. You have a different lens on life and universe. So plan to do something, but don't fix it, because once you go out, you meet other people, you have so many opportunities, and the thing you think now will change. So
Right.
I was thinking, okay, let me just take a vacation, because I don't know what is going to happen. Maybe I'll be as busy as during my corporate life. How did you start developing your new business? What were the steps?
I think you ask about lessons for people. I experimented a lot and I was patient. One of the luxuries of not needing an income necessarily was that I didn't feel time pressure. And that was just a huge gift. But how I began was I had already been writing on LinkedIn a lot. And I kept writing, but I started mentioning that I was available to coach people. I would be happy to be someone's coach and help them and so on. People began to come to me, and also just people would reach out, even if they hadn't seen a message, and they would say, hey, I like what you're writing, or I knew you at Amazon, or I was at Amazon. Could you help me with this problem? So my first step was to build a coaching business. Then about a year into building, 2 years after I left Amazon, something unusual happened. I put out a message where I said, I have room for a few more people in my coaching program. And I got 50 people who replied to me and said, I want in. But then when I discussed price, only like 5 of them wanted to pay at that rate. Well, that was fine. I actually didn't need more than 5. But where my Amazon training kicked in is I said, well, wait a minute. These other 45 people wanted help, but they're not ready to pay for personal coaching. What else could I do for them? And that set me on the path to create my first course, where I did some market research, realized that I could build a course that would address many of the needs of those 45 people. I rolled out the course. In my first class, I had 100 and some people who showed up and paid for the class. And I've now taught that class 5 more times, so 6 times total, always with 100 and some students. I think that's a very interesting business story, because it's about recognizing a need, designing a solution, testing it, and seeing it work. And so I've been very, very happy with that. And now I do coach, but actually I spend most of my time either working on that course or other courses. And I do that because it scales. I do it because you can reach a lot more people than one-on-one coaching.
So by the time you started coaching and you said you put a post that said you are coaching, how many followers do you have?
Today I have about 122,000, but back then I probably only had 15 or 20.
Okay.
15. So it's grown over all that time. And when I began, it was smaller, but those were also the people who knew me best. And so I probably, people are more likely to hire a coach, someone as a coach that they've followed, that they've read something they respect, or that they know personally. And today I would say only a few of my clients are people who knew me in my previous life directly. The vast majority are people that have heard about me through my writing.
Yeah. And how do you build a personal brand after you leave such a name? Because Amazon is such a crown, right?
Well, that you take the crown with you.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, what you do is on your way out the door, you realize that the crown comes with you as a souvenir. If you read many of my posts, they begin with the line, as an Amazon VP, comma. And actually LinkedIn themselves, there's a group at LinkedIn that teaches top writers how to write effectively for the platform. And they told me, always cite your credential in your opening line. And it works very well. Because what they've found in their research is that what people are looking for, they're trying to answer for themselves the question, why you? Why right now? What will I get? So why are you the right person to tell me something? Why should I pay attention right this minute? Because what am I going to get out of it? So why me? Why now? And so I always answer that right in the opening. Now, I've built a post-Amazon brand where I'm known as a speaker and a writer and as a newsletter author. And specifically, I've built a brand around being very direct and honest. I'm willing to take on topics that people in corporate life or other walks of life shy away from because either they're controversial or they're not allowed to speak publicly about, say, diversity or fraud or bad behaving managers or racism. I've built a brand around being able and willing to discuss tough topics.
I see.
But the brand began with using Amazon's name.
You said that there is a group of writers that teach how to write. Can you share this for people for the audience?
It's unfortunately, they find you and invite you. But
okay.
LinkedIn has, if you're very active on LinkedIn has a group of editors that try to teach people how to write well on LinkedIn, and they have a workshop. And so I was invited to that workshop. Now, what I can do is share the key lesson. Their lessons, just very briefly. Number one, I shared, tell people why you have credibility on this topic, whatever your source of credibility is, why you know what you know, and then tell them immediately what they're going to get if they keep reading. That's thing one. Thing two is you can either write an entire post that's your own information, or you can also build a following commenting on public events. So commenting on, if you're an expert in weather, comment on Hurricane Milton. If you have knowledge of basketball, comment on playoffs, et cetera, et cetera. If you have knowledge of finances, then people particularly love posts that break down the economic results of companies. Those are endlessly popular. And then the third thing was be consistent. You won't build a following if you write at random times and you start and stop. People need to learn. Ethan posts every Tuesday and Thursday in the morning. So you just have to stay at it because it's a snowball. So very quickly, that's 60% of the takeaways from the workshop.
I see. Let's talk imposter syndrome.
Okay.
You've been very successful inside the corporate. Is Amazon a corporate, or is it, how do I call it? Corporate, right? A big corporate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big corporation.
And as an entrepreneur, so you still have it, right? Imposter syndrome never disappear. But can you share some ideas of how to deal with it more effectively so it doesn't stop us in our track?
Yes. So imposter syndrome, of course, is just defining the term, is the idea that we feel like we don't really have all the skills necessary to do the job we're doing. At any moment, people are going to find out and realize we're not as good as we seem. And this fear eats at a lot of us, right? And I would say Amazon, with its culture of okay, you did that yesterday, but what are you doing today? Enhanced imposter syndrome in a lot of ways.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Because what you did last year was no one was interested. They were interested in how you were doing on this year's goals. And so to fight imposter syndrome is, of course, an internal mental game in many ways. The first thing is to realize that everyone around you has the same fears. To talk to others, inside or outside, and realize this is a common feeling. It's not, because the feeling begins with the false idea that it's only you who's an imposter.
Yeah.
The second thing that I think really helps is this feeling that I don't quite know what I'm doing. Well, the whole notion of a career is, if your career is going well, at every moment in your career, you're in the biggest job you've yet held. So, of course, it follows that if I'm always doing the biggest job I've ever done, then I'm always going to feel a little bit short of being prepared for that job because I've never done it before. And the way corporations work is they're always trying to give you more and bigger challenges. We talk about stretch goals. And so I think a way to fight it is to realize that feeling a bit stretched and uncomfortable is a sign of success, not a sign of failure. Actually, if you were completely comfortable with what you're doing and you're like, oh, I have this mastered, I'm great, it means you probably haven't grown in a while. And so now, that's how to manage the feeling. It's not going to make it go away.
Absolutely. When you started working by yourself, what was the thing that was the most difficult for you to get accustomed to? Was there anything like this?
Yeah, I think there were a few things. The biggest, of course, is there was no one to tell you if what you were doing was right or wrong. Everyone dreams of having control of their own time right until they have it. And then they realize it's lonely at the top because there's no one you can blame if it doesn't work. You get all the credit if something you do does work, but all the blame if you don't. So one thing that was very hard for me was just sticking to my plan, learning and adapting, but making my own choices. And I did have different things that didn't work out as well as I hoped. The second thing I think was hard, and it comes with being a public figure, is while it doesn't happen too often, occasionally people who have whatever their personal issue is will attack you as a way to get attention or because they have a very different agenda. And I've definitely had some very personal, angry attacks by people that maybe are not classically insane, certainly don't seem rational. The most interesting example I can share quickly to make that specific, I once wrote a post about how as I became successful as a writer, I hired an editor to edit my posts, to make them more concise and better written and good grammar and so on. And this person just went nuts saying, oh, it's not really you. Like, you have someone else doing your writing and real people don't have editors. And I blown away. Like, do you understand how magazines work and news articles work? Like,
and books.
Yeah, editing is a good thing. But he was just, for some reason, it struck him as that made me inauthentic. And not only was he wasn't content to say, oh, you're inauthentic, I won't read what you write. He wanted to get me to admit that I was some sort of liar or fraud.
Yeah. Crazy.
Right. And so this will happen. It's rare, but you can't help but be impacted because you're like, to your point about imposter syndrome, it triggers the well, wait a minute, am I doing something wrong? And you have to step back and say, no, I know who I am, and this is just insanity. But of course, the person never says, well, I'm an insane person, ignore me. They're trying to convince you they have a real point.
Yeah, absolutely. When
When you talk about the imposter syndrome, I think in the beginning, when I was starting 2 years ago, if something didn't work, I would lose sleep over it for days. I was just like, today is like, oh, this doesn't work. Okay, I'll change a little bit. We'll do this. It's just amazing how your mind changes so fast. No sleepless night anymore. Sometimes I even wonder, am I too complacent and I'm not noticing this thing? That's now my worry.
Yes. And I can empathize with you because it's easy to wonder, are you getting, as you said, complacent, comfortable, lazy? There's lots of words for it because things are going well and because you don't have someone constantly pushing you for more, you can be very satisfied. I think both you and I probably have enough internal dissatisfaction to avoid that.
When you were in Amazon, what was your idea of success? And what is your idea of success now?
I think within Amazon, in that context, most of my idea of success was building products people loved and being able then to grow my team and grow my level so I could do more of it. So I definitely wanted to climb the corporate ladder. And my reason for wanting to climb the ladder was not only that it paid better, but it allowed me more influence and more control. Directors at Amazon often, and definitely vice presidents, are really general managers of their business. And so they are a little bit like miniature CEOs. Yes, they report to other people, but from a daily execution business, they have broad latitude in terms of what to do and how to do it. And I like that challenge. And then succeeding at that challenge, which was usually defined as number of happy customers and amount of money, was very easy to measure. When I decided to leave Amazon, it's because I decided that while making money was fun, making money for the company was fun, it wasn't improving the world. And I really wanted to do something that I felt was making people's lives better. And so I now define my mission as helping people find both career success and satisfaction. So I want to help them be successful, but I also want, so many people are unhappy at their jobs. They're stressed. They're disappointed by what they make. They have imposter syndrome, whatever it is. And so I want to help them also feel satisfaction and peace. And so that's my mission today. And of course, that's very different than climb the ladder and make money.
Have you felt stuck in your career ever?
I can say in sort of visible air quotes, I was laid off twice because I've never been officially fired. But both of those layoffs had an overtone of, we're laying you off. Yes, it's a layoff, but you're on the list because we can do without you. And so it was kind of a firing as well as a layoff. And particularly the second one was during a bad economy. It happened in 2003, and I really struggled to find, I had a new family, a young daughter, and I really struggled to find a good job that would support my family. And I had to do a lot of introspection. And then the job I ultimately took required us to sell our house and move, which we didn't necessarily want to do, and paid maybe a little less than I'd been making in a place that cost more and wasn't the best work. And so at that point, I did really feel like, whoa. And so I had to learn lessons about my own behavior and performance, which I did. And then also the fact that it was tough economic times. Both of those factors combined to make that a very difficult time.
So what would you advise people that are stuck? How do they get unstuck?
So you can be stuck in a couple ways. But the first thing, I have to be careful not to trigger people's imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is a false feeling that we're not qualified.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a different type of introspection, which is being able to take actual stock of our skill set, both soft skills and hard skills, and evaluate where we need to improve. And usually the difference is, to do that well requires external feedback. It requires getting the perspectives of a diverse set of others above you, below you, around you in your personal life and professional life who know you, and getting their feedback on where you're strong and where you can grow, and then adjusting based on real feedback, not based on fears. And in my case, the reason I was expendable at 2 companies was I was very caustic or combative. I was right a lot. I was technically good. I was a decent team leader and good at hiring, but I was very critical of others. And eventually the leadership in both those startups was like, well, since we're downsizing, we can get rid of him. He's annoying.
So did you improve on that, being too critical of others?
Absolutely. I learned several lessons. I learned, number one, that just because I didn't see the value in someone else's idea didn't mean there was no value. That I needed to, before I attacked, which is what I used to do, I needed to look deeply and try to understand, why does this person and maybe why do others think there's value? Can I find the value even if I think it's partial or not as good as it could be? Second, I totally changed my focus. I used to personalize criticism. So I would say, oh, that's a dumb idea and Ethan must be a dumb leader. And I learned to change that to say, I don't understand this idea, but I respect you. Would you explain it to me more? And that kind of collaborative approach. I was not afraid to say, well, I've listened and I truly don't see the value in this idea and I'm concerned that it will fail. I would express it about the idea, not about the person. And in the past, I equated bad ideas with dumb people. So yeah, I suspect it's not different for you. Maybe it is. Hopefully it is. But when I look at my early leadership 20 years ago, I cringe, right, at my level of maturity.
Actually, when you speak about this, I absolutely 110% relate, because I was exactly the same. And I think it comes from the fact that I like to be open and transparent. I just like to say the things as they are. I don't want to, lie or just sugarcoat. But there's always a better way to say something to somebody. And I had my fair share of, beating, because I was just like thinking, because I'm right, I can do whatever. And then I learned.
we have the exact same experience. What I tell people now is that it's fine to be professionally stern or professionally rigorous, but you need to be interpersonally considerate.
Yeah.
And I was mixing being professionally critical with also being personally critical or insensitive.
Yeah.
And that's really the lesson.
Let's talk a little bit about what you are doing at the moment.
Sure.
And you're helping people develop their careers.
Yes.
Can I summarize it like this?
You can.
If I come to you, what would be your key elements that you would recommend to somebody who is at the middle of their career? Okay. And in this time that everything changes, they're a little bit not sure where to go next. What would be your advice?
Yeah. Well, part of my advice I've come to feel pretty strongly about is you have to think it's worth working backwards and beginning with what gives you meaning in life. Yes, you want a job and you want a stable job, but ultimately, as you've discovered, your corporate employment is not the end of your life. It's a step. And so to the degree you can, you want to have a clear vision of what do I actually care about? And then you try to steer your corporate employment as much as is possible to line up with something you're passionate about. There's an argument of should you rely on passion or not to drive your work? while I believe you can be a professional and you can do a lot of jobs that you don't like, if it is something you love, or you can find something you're truly interested in, the advantage is that will not exhaust you. If you're enjoying what you're doing, it takes very little energy. It can even give you energy. And then I believe if you find something you enjoy doing, because it gives you energy, you can work long hours, do great work, and that usually ends up with you being paid well. My favorite example of this, of course, is I worked for Amazon's Twitch subsidiary. Twitch is a video game streaming company where the top people who play video games and entertain their audiences make millions or tens of millions of dollars a year playing video games. So if you're really good at something that you love, there's a living in any space. That said, the second piece of my advice goes back to what I said about feedback. Many people, they're stuck because there's a mismatch between what they think they should be doing and how they're doing it and what the corporation and leader above them actually values. So you've managed people. I think we all who've managed have that person on our team who's working very hard, but they're working mostly on something we wish they wouldn't. And we keep trying to tell them, like, it's very nice that you're fixing bugs, but we need to build this new feature. Or it's very nice that you're creating a lovely annual report, but we need to close the books on this month's financials. By the way, it's the 30th. And they just can't. And so I think to get unstuck, you have to understand the gap between what you think of yourself and what others do. And you do that through feedback and humility, which is another lesson I needed early in my career. I wasn't very humble. I thought, I've been promoted several times. I'm very smart. I'm good.
Top of the world.
Right. And, then you learn that maybe you could be better.
When you look back, what is the toughest period or event in your career, and how do you overcome it?
Definitely the toughest event in my professional career occurred at Amazon. I was responsible for a major software release, the first release of the Amazon App Store. I was the engineering director in charge. We got to the launch day, and the launch failed under load because it worked in the lab, but I had not given my team the time and given them the direction to do sufficient load testing. This launch was one Jeff Bezos was waiting for personally. And when he woke up in the morning and it wasn't live, he started emailing me. And he got very angry. And he looped in my boss and my boss's boss, who reported to Jeff. And so first Jeff's yelling at me in email, kind of flaming me. And then those two, particularly the senior vice president, feeling like, well, Jeff wants to hate on this guy, so Jeff's busy, so I'll hate on him for Jeff.
Yeah.
And my job was on the line, as I later found out. And so there are three pieces of this story. There's short-term how I recovered, which very quickly I earned credibility back by sending hourly updates. This is what this is where we are. This is what we're going to do in the next hour. You'll get another update in the next hour. And then following that and earning credibility back. So thing one was fix the problem and do it very humbly. Okay, did that. Yeah. Second thing was, I had a meeting with Jeff the next week that I could have gone to or skipped. It was a meeting. And I thought to myself, if I skip this meeting, I might as well pack my bags.
Yeah.
And so I went and sat right next to him to force us to have a conversation and find out where we stood. Luckily for me, Jeff was very gracious and supportive. So by facing him, I showed that I wasn't afraid, and maybe he had been flaming me in email, but with a couple days of gap, he was willing to be a decent person in person.
Yeah.
The hard part, though, from your question was I had been very close to my promotion to vice president. It was being talked about. And I had a 2-year setback. I had to spend 2 years proving, particularly to this senior vice president, who was the decision maker in many ways, that my technical errors and my lack of diligence was a lesson I could learn and change and improve. And it took 2 years of proving myself. And I think a lot of people would have quit at that point. They'd have been like, well, I'm being punished and I'm being held back. I looked at it and said, well, the real truth is I screwed up, and so own it.
Yeah.
I told you I've been laid off for bad behavior. I've never been fired for bad performance. And I came very close there because the senior vice president told me, he looked right in my eyes in a meeting I had with him and said, well, I was wondering whether or not I should fire you. I don't think I have to, though. But it was a to my face, like you and I are talking. Oh, yeah, I was thinking about firing you, but I think you can probably stay. That's literally what he said.
Only starting receiving emails from Jeff Bezos is enough to put you on really in a state of despair.
Yeah, it was tough because Jeff, when he's frustrated, will ask rhetorical questions like, why would anyone build a system this way? And so he's not. He literally, I've learned he's wondering this. He's rolling his eyes up in his head and wondering, why would anyone do something so dumb? But of course, writing it that way doesn't help the other person.
Exactly. No, exactly. For him, it's like a question which, he has to ask it. But for you, it's like the end of the world.
Yeah.
All right. Before we finish, can I ask you that question? A lot of people ask me to ask. I know it's a silly question, but is it really true that you had in Amazon, the meetings were like, you get a document which you read in silence and only then the meeting starts?
Oh, for sure.
Really?
It's not only true, it's absolutely standard practice and has been for at least, now 20 full years.
Wow.
You can read about it in, one of my managers wrote a book. It's called Working Backwards by Colin Breyer and Bill Carr. And it describes the start of that process and how Jeff and his leadership team designed that process. But yes, I don't know how much you want to know about it, but basically the company decided that deeply thinking is what matters and reading in silence is the way to do that. Jeff once said that he reads each line of the document and then he pauses and asks himself, do I agree with that? So he's really analytical, but everything the person has written, he reads a line or reads a paragraph and then stops and says, okay, Ethan has told me whatever, the moon is made of green cheese. Do I agree with that? And then he evaluates the whole paper that way and then discussion. What Jeff was reacting to was many companies are driven by PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And if you think about PowerPoint, if we speak technically, it has what's called low information density, very little information. But if we speak non-technically, the very name of the software is about the speaker making powerful points kind of at the audience.
Yeah.
And Jeff wanted discussion, not advocacy.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And do you use this method now?
Sometimes, I'm a one-person business. Maybe I work with a few collaborators. So I haven't written a true Amazon 6-pager since I left. But as a fun example, one of my previous managers and a couple of our peers got together recently to have a social day, a fun day at my house. And the manager, my old manager, brought a 6-pager to drive discussion of a topic. He wanted a full sit and read in silence document that we all read together. He handed out on paper, and this is over beers in my backyard. So it's that deeply ingrained.
Unbelievable. Just to finish it off, what is one thing we don't know about you?
I play ice hockey.
Oh, interesting.
So I played as a kid and I play as an adult. So that's, just to pick something quickly. Not a lot of people play ice hockey and I still have my teeth.
Thank you, Ethan. This was so interesting to talk to you. If we had time, I would have asked about 20, 30 more questions. There's so much I want to know. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you so much.
It.
I'm always happy if you have more questions. I'm happy to come back sometime and answer 20 more.
Great. That's great. I'll take you on this promise.
All right. Well, I would love to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much and have a great day.
Same to you.
Please hit subscribe to the show and leave a review or comment about how you find this episode.